Apple held its annual Worldwide Developers Conference this week, and joining me to break it all down is tech analyst Eric Bleeker. How's it going?
Good to be here.
Great to be here. Before we get into the particulars, set the table for me. What is the Worldwide Developers Conference? Why is it a big deal?
Yeah, it's held annually. It's kind of Apple's opportunity to set the agenda for the year ahead. And it's kind of changed in what it is as a conference. The iPhone used to be announced at this. You had the 3GS and the 4 announced there. But with 4S, they pushed that back to fall. So now, you know, it's more of a look at the software itself. We saw no new hardware unveiled this year, which could disappoint some. But I was very excited, and we'll explore why in this show. So it used to be a kind of larger deal, but Apple has become such a complex company with larger, more important products in terms of revenue and other factors that now they split events up. So you've got WWDC. We'll have an iPhone launch probably in September, and maybe even iPad one separately because they've broken those up.
Okay, so for this conference, as a consumer, it's kind of hard to really get in there and understand what's going on because it's meant basically for software developers, right? So it's a lot of language that maybe someone like me won't understand. I'm like, get to the iPhone part, right?
Welcome to the club.
So it's great to have you here to help us kind of break it down.
Yeah.
Even though neither of us have a background in software development.
We'll do our best.
We'll do our best. All right, let's start with the biggest headline. What do you think was the biggest announcement to come out of the conference?
I think it was Apple opening up. And not to overstate it, but I've actually got a quote here. This is from The Verge, a company that does great tech coverage. And their quote was, "Apple has come out of deep freeze." Ooh. And they had no new products, but that's fine because they're kind of addressing the plumbing of iOS. So what did we see? We saw extensions. That's a way for apps to actually talk to one another and kind of share their best features. We saw CloudKit, which basically enables people to go out and build in Apple's cloud, which to many consumers has been an underwhelming product. And we've seen things like HealthKit and HomeKit, which we'll talk more about later. Are you enjoying HomeKit?
Kit feels like the new i.
It feels like some show for like featuring a 6-year-old girl or something. But anyways, it's very serious business, and we'll get to why. So anyways, it's all about Apple trusting outside developers, giving them more opportunities, which in the past they've had far more control over iOS, which at times has come to their detriment with things like, you know, when they released Maps and no one liked it. You know, sometimes you need to be able to go out there and trust the development community to build things.
Right, so we didn't hear any specific, you know, we didn't see the new iPhone 6. But for me, as a consumer, I kind of still want to know.
Yeah.
Did we learn anything about what might be going on with some of the new features, what I can expect in September?
Yeah, and I'll read this so I don't say it incorrectly, but Xcode 6, which is Apple's development platform, has a feature to resize simulate iPhone and iPad screens, which a lot of people are thinking is an indication of a larger iPhone because, you know, it is adjusting the screen size. So right now it's stuck at 4 inches. The speculation is that when Apple announces the iPhone 6 in fall, it's going to come in 4.7 and possibly 5.5 inches. But let's shift looking to kind of how this is going to affect Apple's stock and how investors out there turn something like Developers Conference into, you know, actionable insights.
Right.
So we've seen a positive reaction on Tuesday and Wednesday, which the headlines is there's no new hardware. There's not a lot of things to get excited about, which to me is actually very positive because people are looking at some of the long-term strategic ramifications of some of these software changes Apple's doing. So as we're going to get to later in the show, Apple's talked a lot about a great pipeline, but people think of that as products, things like televisions, watches. Their pipeline might be something like larger screen iPhones, but Apple's opening up, you know, wearables through its software with basically HealthKit, and maybe they won't release their own product. So the fact that, you know, investors after this conference have had a positive reaction says to me that people are thinking a little bit differently about Apple right now, and especially if they might disappoint some investors without as many product categories as you expect in the latter half of the year. Something like just being able to release those larger iPhones, which will lead to some earnings growth, will probably satisfy people more. And hey, to be fair, you have seen a run up in Apple's stock price across recent weeks and months.
And you mentioned HealthKit a few times, and this is kind of software. The idea would be a challenge to Fitbit, Jawbone, that kind of thing, which speaks to an iWatch. And maybe it will have a very heavy emphasis on health monitoring. The whole Fitbit Fitbit fad, I guess, is not going away. I have a Fitbit, you have a Fitbit, but maybe we'll buy an iWatch when it comes out. What do you think Apple could do better when it comes to the space of taking on the wearable health technology?
Yeah, I actually think they're addressing it in the right way, because they're actually not challenging these people. In fact, they're giving them the tools to make their products better. Right now, the problem is we're in such a discovery phase for wearables. Everyone's trying to figure out what best to do with them and what consumers want. There are some statistics out there, very high burnout rates. You were just saying you're not wearing your Fitbit today.
Fitbit anymore.
A lot of people buy these things and they put them away. So we're still exploring what people want. What HealthKit is essentially a central data store that, it gives a place for different kinds of wearables to be able to talk to each other, give a full picture of your health, and an end goal, maybe be able to push that health picture out to healthcare professionals. So there's a very tangible way that it's improving people's lives. Now, where I think a misconception in this category might be, people think Apple's going to make an iWatch because we've heard so much about it.
Yeah, we've been waiting for the iWatch.
But likewise, we heard about an Apple TV forever, and they haven't approached the market how we expected. So there's two ways you can look at this. Apple will create more revenue by releasing an iWatch, or a HealthKit strengthens their moat for the iPhone, because all of these devices are interacting with your phone as the central intelligence platform. It locks you into iOS more and makes your phone more useful. So that doesn't generate direct revenue, but when you've got a product that generates over $30 billion in profits a year, you need to keep improving it to make sure it stays ahead of the pack. So I think people looking at this as a watch play, we don't really have a good understanding of what a watch brings to the market yet. I think Apple realizes that. I think the right play for right now is creating that platform so wearables can talk to each other, become more useful, and actually maybe become something serious in the medical community.
All right, so what are your chances, do you think, on Apple bringing out an iWatch? You don't have to be like not in the fall, but just like when, like.
I'll go with 50-50.
Oh, okay.
So let's look at kind of the competitive market here. Samsung has a watch. They said 500,000 were shipped in the first quarter. I don't doubt that they're shipping watches. I doubt anyone's wearing them or likes them. And we've seen Google's position. They have Android Wear as their new kind of development platform, and they're big on things like watches. But where Google's strength is, they're very contextually strong. Something like Google Now. I don't know if you're familiar with Google Now.
I'm not familiar with Google Now.
It's something that's built into Android now, and it's specifically seeking out to only give you information that's most relevant to you, teams that you follow, scores, weather around you, so that at a glance you can get what's most important to you. The problem with a watch is very low screen space. So because Google has very good contextual clues, they can know what maybe to put on that.
Apple, know where you are, too. So if it's like you're at work, therefore you're going to be more interested in stock analysis. You're at home on the weekend, you want the scores.
Yep,
right?
Because Google is so good at collecting. The future!
It's going to be so awesome.
But Apple isn't as good at that context per se, and right now maybe they can catch up. So I think the path that they're going for is make the devices more dumb, make it a, where is my Fitbit? Make it a single use kind of function, let it niche into more medical applications, and let your phone be the smarts on that. So if Google has the contextual awareness to make a watch maybe work, maybe Apple doesn't want to do that because no one's really figured out how to make a great watch, how to make it last long enough people care. But we have figured out a lot of these, devices that can connect to a central phone. So I think people want to apply this to Apple because other people are doing it. But I don't know if they're going to do what we expect because they so often, they get us like that, We're like, do this, Apple, and no, they zigzag.
Right. Well, keeping on the idea of connectivity, they also announced HomeKit, a set of tools to make your iPhone connect with things around your house, wirelessly control your thermostat. We have a Nest at our house. I know that's not Apple.
I have a Nest as well.
We like our Nest. Door locks, other kind of stuff here. What did we learn about the HomeKit, or what do you think is exciting here?
Would you trust door locks?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I guess if I tested it enough, I would. Yeah, would you? Would you not?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I've pre-ordered door locks. I'm all in on the connected home, but I'm a dork. So we're talking about moving from dorks like you and I into kind of the mainstream community. And one of the big problems with that is the connected home is complex. Whenever you buy these new products, often you have different hubs because they're relying on different standards and you've got all these different apps to manage it. You really do need a central platform to be able to control that. So let me read, and I don't want to sit here reading for an hour, but what Apple's developer page says about this. It says, by promoting common protocol for home automation devices, stay with me, HomeKit makes possible a marketplace where the app a user controls their home with doesn't have to be created by a vendor, i.e. a centralized platform.
My Nest app.
Yes.
I have to open up, yep.
And it's annoying when you've got a ton of them.
There we go.
Accessories from multiple vendors can be integrated into a coherent whole. And then you add things like control via Siri or being able to group sets of connected devices. Lights off, turning off every
Siri
device in your home.
Yeah.
I know, and that's such a good use case. I met with a company named Revolve, which right now is solving this problem. They have a kind of central device that puts all of your apps in a single app, all of your home automation. And they said when they started, there was an average of 6 different connected devices. Now there's 12. So if you want a whole connected home to be able to work, but also make connections to each other, that maybe when you walk by a proximity sensor, lights just turn on or off, or music plays, you really need the centralized platform. So I think it's really good. It's good for Apple's ecosystem specifically because, you know, this is kind of a lock into Apple. But I think that we need these kinds of programs to get the Internet of Things to mature. Right,
the Internet of Things. We'll be digging deep into that later because I know that's your thing.
I love the Internet.
Digging into the connected home though a bit more, what other companies are going to stand to benefit, or what other companies are you watching in that space?
Yeah, Apple actually put up a slide at the presentation showing some vendors they're working with on HomeKit. Notably absent, Google's Nest. So we shall see. Some very obvious players would be something like a General Electric or Honeywell. Honeywell's home automation unit includes a lot of things, including things like HVAC, but it does do $16.6 billion in business a year, which is 42% of their revenue, so that's a lot. Yeah. But you know, I think we need to look at chip companies. At the presentation on the slide, they actually talked with some chip companies they're working with on common standards. These include Broadcom, Cree, which is big in LED, TI, and Marvell. And I think Broadcom is a leader in things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, both enabling technologies for all these connected devices, stands to benefit a lot. And I think you can actually be kind of clever about this and also go all the way down to the chip level. Because the more connected devices you have, the more chips you'll see. So ARM Holdings is very expensive, but basically every single one of these chips is built on ARM Holdings architecture. But even before that, ARM's very expensive. A Taiwan Semiconductor is a dominant chip manufacturer. And well, they're getting a lot of profits on very advanced stuff like the smartphone processor. Their older kind of production facilities are fully depreciated and can build a lot of this IoT stuff. So I think a Taiwan Semiconductor, a $100 billion company, very fascinating play to be able to see some benefits from this in existing to core business that's already firing on many cylinders. So lots of ways to potentially play this.
So you rattled off a lot of companies there.
Sure did.
So for someone, right, because there's a lot of people who could stand to benefit. For someone who is maybe willing to take a bit more risk, is Taiwan Semiconductors the way to go? Is someone who wants a little less risk, do they go with a Honeywell or a GE?
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be, if you go with someone like a Honeywell or GE, well, a Honeywell...
Huge businesses.
They're huge businesses, so the impact is relatively minimal. And also, they are facing some threat. Honeywell makes connected thermostats, which is under target from Nest itself. So, you know, I think if you're looking for less risk, actually Taiwan Semiconductor is a pretty good play. It trades about 16 times earnings, which is all right for the chip space, has consistently seen high growth, and yeah, it's just a solid company with great operating fundamentals.
All right, one to look into. All right, let's step away a little bit and look at, in general here, Apple made a lot of announcements. Do you think that they were kind of the own winner of their own conference? Like, did Apple come out being like, we nailed this, we won, yes?
Well, Tim Cook better hope so. I think they did a good job. I think they set kind of their vision, and I think commentators who are saying Apple's been in a bit of a malaise are correct in saying, hey, they're finally coming out, they're opening up iOS, they're making it very contextual, they're kind of streamlining between OS X to iOS, all these different things. They're very future-proofing the platform. But as far as other companies that benefit from these changes, I actually think Microsoft, of all people, you know, we don't think of Apple and Microsoft as BFFs, but, you know, when you look at what Apple did, they introduced Spotlight, which actually moves kind of search into the operating system layer, and they put Bing in Spotlight. So Bing gets a little more integration with Apple. In addition to that, extensions gives more integration for different apps to be able to, the best features from one app can be another app, which when you look at Microsoft putting Office onto things like mobile, it enables something like Office to be more powerful. Also, through some of their new, there's never been a file system in mobile, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. Yeah, and some of their new, like CloudKit, enables finally having a rough file system, which benefits someone like Microsoft, where you are creating new files and documents in their program. So I think a lot of these are subtle shifts, but I think it gives Microsoft some opportunity and maybe pushes them and kind of Bing into a place where they could do a little bit more replacement of Google in the years to come, which could segue to a loser, I do think.
Well, who is your loser, pray tell?
Oh, I will go with Google.
Okay.
And we know that there's no love lost between Apple and Google. And actually, Google pays Apple a lot to be the default search provider. It's not commonly known, but it's believed that they pay them over $1 billion a year, which is essentially pure profit. So that's nothing to sneeze at, but it is kind of instructive. When you do a search, let's say you search for best albums of 2013, Google will actually pull the results in. So you don't need to click on results, which can hurt websites such as ours. Right. In much the same way, Apple's Spotlight brings basically semantic information, is what they call semantic search, in so that you don't need to go to Google. So I think Apple is kind of towing the water of kind of reducing the reliance of Google. Also, they're bringing a lot of stuff into native apps themselves, which diminishes the importance of the web, which is Google's playground. So I think there are some, at the current time, minimal threats to Google. It will not be affecting its earnings per share much over the next 12 months, but strategically it shows how Apple is potentially moving away. That being said, they do have some opportunities. Extensions, how I mentioned apps can talk to each other. Google could potentially benefit from that because they have a lot of great services that will perhaps be able to take the lion's share of extensions use.
All right, so the one name, big name, kind of a big name, kind of a big deal in tech that has not come out yet, Facebook. What are your thoughts on Facebook in light of all this?
Well, Facebook's so intriguing. I mean, I think their valuation's up to a $160 billion company, and they don't own the operating system layer, yet they're probably the most important thing on top of an operating system. So we've seen them kind of seeing what they want to be on top of Android and on top of iOS. Do you remember Facebook Home, when they built this kind of wonky operating system on top of Android? It was a terrible product and it never went anywhere, but shows their ambitions, and they're also creating a bunch of niche kind of applications. On someone's phone, they might not even know it and have 5 or 6 Facebook apps between Facebook itself, Instagram, WhatsApp now, and Facebook Messenger. So they're building these out. And what they've tried doing is actually creating a system for creating functionality links between apps called deep linking. Well, Apple's extensions kind of removes that. So you have kind of an interesting situation there, which something that Facebook saw as their opportunity in one fell stroke, so to say. Apple kind of removes a big initiative. Yet that being said, Facebook is so integral to so many people that provides an opportunity that they can have extensions. I think the only problem is that Facebook's ambitions on top of the operating system are so much higher, but other social apps such as Twitter or even a Pinterest benefit a lot from these extensions. Facebook will too. It's just, again, their ambition set is a level higher than anyone else. So I'm leaving them in the frenemies category right now, where, you know, they're scratching each other's back a little bit, but Apple is blunting some of Facebook's deeper ambitions.
It is kind of hard to keep track of like the give and take between these companies and their friends over here, and then they hurt each other over here, and they're suing each other over here.
It is,
and I mean,
it is Game of Thrones.
Thanksgiving must be very awkward.
Oh yes.
All right, I have a selfish question because we have an Apple TV at my home, and we use it every day. I mean, we love it. We use it every day. Did we learn anything new about Apple TV and what's going on there?
Not directly.
Okay.
But I'm going to go into my weird kind of Eric theory hour.
Let's go there.
We have been, well, the collective, everyone who follows Apple has been disappointed that they haven't been able to do more with TV. No one loves their TVs, yet we spend so much use with our televisions. The number of users of TVs in the world is 5.5 billion. Smartphones is 1.6 billion. televisions are still very important. We spend a lot of time with them. So
we do.
We spend way too much across the board, way too much.
I blame HBO.
So Apple has an opportunity to do something there, but when they first started talking about the Apple TV, they were looking at, people were talking about 1500 TV. And then the market shifted down and Chromecast was coming out at $35 and Roku $50. So you had a market that went too low. So if Apple wants to come out and have something meaningful to them in revenue, maybe it's in that $300, $400 range, but you need to justify that value. So one interesting thing they did, and hang with me, they released a low-level 3D graphics API. Okay. Hang with me.
I'm still there.
But it essentially allows up to 10 times the performance is what they claimed, and we saw a very impressive demo.
And when you talk about performance, what do you think by performance? What do you mean by
graphically intensive games, basically, that you could create.
Is completely not in my sweet spot, but I'm still with you.
Well, something that's on like Xbox.
Right.
You look at Xbox versus Candy Crush. It's two very different things, right?
Right, yes.
So anyways, what I find interesting, number one, you could develop that for iPhones and iPads, but also it creates a very unique proposition that they could be able to maybe bring, if they get proper developer support, they could bring this new technology to be able to use on an Apple TV-like device and get console-level games released there. And all of a sudden, what you pay for an Xbox was originally $500, now $400, PS4 $400. And if the Apple TV is willing to play console-level games, it's an additional value proposition that consumers might be able to pay for it. So again, they need to get developer support, and this is something that's hard for Android to copy, because why they're able to do this is because they've made a shift up to 64-bit architecture, which Android is very fragmented, but Apple can control. So it's an example of how them integrating and controlling their whole ecosystem is very important, and it's something that they can do very differently in a TV space. So if at some point you see an Apple TV with really advanced game possibilities, we saw it right here. No one's talking about, but we'll see in the coming years.
All right. I'll be honest, that doesn't make me too excited, but, but I don't know. It's some 15-year-old boy.
You're not playing Call of Duty.
I'm not playing. I'm not playing Call of Duty, so that's maybe my loss. All right. So I want to get back to one last question here about the Internet of Things, since that is your baby, your puppy, your world. I don't know. Like you're basically our big subject matter expert on the Internet of Things here at the Motley Fool. So I wanted to get kind of your parting thoughts here on where Apple is going to take us. Where could you see this going with Apple?
Yeah, I mean, whew.
Sorry.
I could go for hours on that, but let's just
make it healthy here.
I think what you need to look at is Apple is providing right now a kind of central platform for us to finally be able to build off. The problem is there is no architecture, there is no, in some ways, HTML or central standardization for the Internet of Things. So I think Apple is seeding something like a wearables market, which will then be able to show future opportunities. You see studies on Internet of Things, and it's like, oh, $19 trillion market, and it says in economic activity, and people look around them, and they're not seeing this fantasy world, so they go, I'm going to look at this as hogwash. What you really need to look at, as Gartner says, by 2020, the Internet of Things will drive an incremental 300 billion, in revenue. Which, when you think of that in context, the global online ad market, which supports companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, is worth 116 billion. Apple has about 170 billion in sales. So this is very real money. But it's diffused to a lot of markets. So you look at some of that revenue going to big data plays or companies making sense of all this information. Some of it's going to chip companies, which the chip industry on its own is 300 billion, so the same size. And another is going to building cellular towers and devices. So I think part of the problem is that it is such an early trend in its adoption, but I think investors should really be watching what Apple does as a possible central platform and catalyst to getting this started. And I think when you're looking at companies, there are some with very real results in this trend right now. Sierra Wireless is one that's recommended by Motley Fool Stock Advisor. It does M2M, machine-to-machine communication modules. And I think you could look at some of the chip companies. I called out Taiwan Semiconductor in an earlier kind of segment, and ARM Holdings as well. But I think, too, when you're looking at that application side, the software side is really what's been holding this back. But you will have some opportunities. I think Splunk is a company in the big data space, which should be able to get a toehold in the Internet of Things in coming years.
That's not public.
It's publicly traded.
It is publicly
and it was recently recommended by Motley Fool rule breakers.
Okay.
So, you know, you have the certification of the Motley Fool behind that as well, so to say. But these are risky companies because it's a very risky field. So make sure to kind of spread your bets out a little bit because some will definitely fail because we don't know what this is going to look like a year away. All I can say is some moves are being taken that this market will finally make sense.
Right. It looks like Apple could be the playground where everything comes together and plays nice with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Maybe,
Does that sum it up, maybe?
You know, it's a little enclosed, which I think some people would hope it was a little more broad, but you got to take baby steps first, and we'll see how the industry coalesces in the coming years.
All right, well, I think we've talked enough.
About everything.
About everything
Apple.
ever. Yeah, so we can either stick around and talk about Game of Thrones, or we can just let everyone go. So, do you have anything else you want to add?
I think they would just like to go at this point.
They might want to hear our thoughts on Game of Thrones. But all right, well, for Eric Bleeker, I'm Allison Southwick. Thanks for watching.